All right, welcome back to Bigfoot's Wilderness. I've got a great encounter story for you tonight. It's called Hairy Demon of the Hills. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. My name is Leah, and I've been listening to your channel for the past few months, and I've been wanting to tell you my story. Well, it's technically not my story, but my grandmother's. Her name was Rose. She had an encounter with what had to be a Bigfoot. I've always been fascinated with the subject, and her story only piqued my interest more. But she had a different name for it. She called it the Hairy Demon. I know her story well. She's recounted it to me so many times over the years. I'm in my 50s now, and she's been gone for about 5 years. She passed away at 89 after a massive stroke in 2013. The story I'm about to tell you is of her account. I also want to mention that she never told her husband or my mother. When my mom would bring me over to my grandma's, she would give me her undivided attention. We seemed to have a special bond. Grandma and I just always clicked. I called her Rose. That's not her real name, of course, but she wore a perfume that when I was little, I kept calling her Rose because the fragrance reminded me of a rose. Well, it stuck, and soon others called her Rose too. It just kind of fit her. She was more than just a grandmother. I believe my mom was jealous of our relationship. When I entered my teens, Rose confided this terrible secret to me. I feel that she wanted to tell someone for years, but had a hard time confiding in just about anybody. At first, when she'd tell the story, she would close her eyes, shudder, and then have to stop. But as time went on, she would eventually get through the whole story. By the end of her story, my palms would be sweating and my heart would race. I could feel the anxiety she was feeling. I admire my grandmother for being such a brave and strong woman. The year was 1952, and my grandfather, Theodore, whom I barely knew, went off to fight in the Korean War. Rose was in her late 20s with a baby girl and now had to run a household and raise my mom at the same time. Her husband Theodore had come from money but never acted like he had any. They were quite conservative and only bought what they needed. However, they did live in a very nice traditional 2-story home with a few acres of land and picturesque hills just outside of Lynchburg, Virginia. Her 2 sisters lived nearby, which made life more bearable. Rose had gotten married in her late 20s, which was practically an old maid back then. She was deeply in love and missed her husband terribly. At times, when she felt low, she would sit out on the porch after she put her daughter to bed at night and would cry. She had an awful feeling that she'd never see her husband again. Nothing could console her. It was one of those nights that while she wept on her front porch, that her dog was barking fiercely from within inside the house. The Boston Terrier would jump on the couch and then back down to the floor. She was startled and turned quickly towards the front window to see what was wrong with the dog. As she turned her head, she caught a glimpse of something moving across the front lawn. It seemed like a large shadow. It was fleeting. She thought it was nothing and went back inside to calm her dog down. That night, as she lay down to go to sleep, she heard a distant howl. It went on for what seemed like to be several minutes. She could tell it wasn't a coyote. It had a distinct sound. It went up and down. She couldn't place it, and she thought it was an eerie sound. Rose grew up on a farm and knew her animals. She spent plenty of time with her 6 brothers working the family farm, pulling her own weight, playing in the fields and woods, and hunting with her brothers and father. Her little Boston Terrier growled from under the bed. About an hour later, she was abruptly awakened from her deep sleep by her dog frantically barking now downstairs. Rose rushed down the stairs half awake, trying to quiet the dog to keep her daughter from waking up. "No, no," she said in a breathy voice. "Stop jumping on the door. I'm coming." But as she rushed down the steps, the noise continued, and it was coming from outside. Something was twisting the front doorknob. Rose was still groggy and confused. She slowly stepped towards the door and parted the curtains. And what Rose thought she saw might be a bear. "Oh my God," she whispered. It seemed to be crouched down at the bottom of the door. She stifled her scream and rushed to the hall closet. The bear seemed to be grunting, and Rose was panicking as she searched through her closet. Clothes and packages were falling off the shelves as she reached for the shotgun. She knew how to use it, but wondered if calling her sister on the phone might be a better option. So in one hand, she contacted her sister, and in the other tried to aim the shotgun at the front door while also shushing the dog. After excitedly explaining to her sister that a bear was trying to break in the house, her sister yelled to her husband to get over there, and as she dropped the phone and loaded a shell, the baby began to wail upstairs. The bear suddenly stopped turning the knob, stood straight up, and leaned forward, pressing both paws on either side of the door, and looked directly in the window at Rose. Rose could feel the blood drain to her feet. She wanted to scream. This was no bear. This is the part of the story where my grandmother would lose it. She describes the face and the fact that it absolutely wasn't a bear, but more of a hairy demon. The creature locked eyes with Rose. It stood to its full height and seemed to sneer at her. She looked up at it and couldn't seem to break its gaze. This thing was at least a foot taller than her husband, which was 2 feet taller than her. Its eyes were large and black. The skin seemed lighter, perhaps a dark gray. Its head was large and round. It had a mouthful of yellow teeth and big wide lips. It appeared to have hair all over its face. Rose began to shake and cry. Even with a shotgun, she didn't feel safe. But her actions showed what a mother will do to protect her family. She began to raise the shotgun up and pointed it directly at the creature's face. She could swear its expression changed. Her little terrier began to whine and shake and relieve itself on the carpet. Rose glanced down for a split second at the dog, and when she looked back up, the creature was gone. She mustered up enough courage to peer out the door. It seemed to have disappeared. It was no longer on the porch. She didn't hear any noise as it left. What did I just see? Did I dream it? No, this was real, and she needed to leave. Where's Joe? How much longer would she have to wait? The baby continued to cry, and Rose hurried upstairs to calm her down. After several minutes, she brought the baby downstairs with a bag packed for the both of them. She sat on the couch, clutching her daughter, waiting for her brother-in-law. Shortly, the bright lights of an approaching car appeared and pulled up in front of the house. Joe had a light and flashed it around the front yard. Eventually, he came up to the door. "Yeah, something was definitely here. That hedge bush and fruit tree I planted looks like a truck ran over them. And your door, what in the hell?" The bottom right half of the door had scratches, and the doorknob was severely bent. It was only a matter of time before the door would give way. It must have been a bear. "Let's get you out of this house. I'll come back in the morning and I'll fix the door," said Joe. Since Theodore had left for the army, Rose always locked the door. Things could have been much worse. The door was replaced the next day, but Rose still felt unsafe, staying alone at the house. As she stared at the broken door, she suddenly realized that this thing had hands. It was twisting the doorknob, maybe even bending it to the point it would break. At night, she could still hear on occasion an eerie, distant howl that chilled her to the bone. She would only spend the night in her own house when family would stay too. Her husband would soon return from the war, and Rose would never tell him what really happened. Rose felt unsafe and alone whenever Theodore wasn't home. She expressed her desire to move and be closer to family for the sake of her daughter. Family was important, and finally they moved out and headed across town. My grandmother Rose kept her secret. She didn't want to be ridiculed or laughed at. She would scour the paper every day searching for anything unusual, but never found mention of a creature in the area. She only told me the true story. My grandmother was of sound mind till her dying day. I miss her and think of her often since she's passed, but know that she's at peace and no longer feels haunted by the image of the hairy demon.